There are lots of people in this area, and data science is just exploding in all kinds of ways. And I think a lot of people are definitely millennials or people younger than millennials are also looking. It seems like the values are shifting a little bit, where it's less about just making money. So I think initially everyone's kind of like, oh, data science, that's a lucrative field. I can get a job at, getting more people to click on ads or get a job in finance, which is are totally fine jobs. They're kind of bored of studying. They like data science, but they're kind of bored of getting people to click on ads, and they feel kind of unfulfilled and lacking purpose. And I think there are ways to use this data towards social good as well.
Seth, hi man, how are you doing?
Good, good. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. I'm excited for today. Big data and all this sort of stuff. It's going to be cool.
Yeah. I hope so.
Looking forward to it. So, first things first, how do you describe what you do for work or on a day-to-day basis?
Well, so I guess I'm a data scientist and an author, a writer. So, I've spent most of my time on books. I wrote Everybody Lies. I'm in the process of writing another book, and other than that, I don't know, a lot of random projects. I do random consulting for companies, and there's not necessarily a standard day, but
I got you. Is it a lot of time on spreadsheets or similar sort of applications?
Yeah, R, the coding language, there's a lot of time on that. Kind of moving back and forth between R and Google Docs, because I guess the combination of data science, which is R, and writing, which is Google Docs.
Got you.
And then sometimes just researching, a lot of reading. So a lot of reading other people's studies, kind of reading what other people are talking about, since I can't just write about my own studies.
Which is a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah, would be lovely. So you wrote a book called Everybody Lies, New York Times bestseller, but I heard that you wanted to call it How Big Is My Penis? Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah.
You wanted to call your book How Big Is Your Penis?
No, How Big Is My Penis?
How big is my penis? Yes.
Well, no. Basically, the reason for it is that's one of the top. Well, I talk about how men ask Google more questions about their penis than any other body part, and that one of the top questions they ask Google about their penis is how big is my penis, which is just like an absurd question to ask Google, right? They're not going to be able to answer that. So I kind of thought that title would kind of get the flavor of what some of the things I was talking about. But I think one of the things that my research has shown is the absurdity of the human condition, the absurdity of people. People kind of put on a very presentable front, but in the privacy of their own home, on their Google search engine or the websites they visit, and they go to Pornhub, they kind of just show a different side of themselves, which is a little bit stupider, a little bit less polished, a little bit weirder, a little bit sometimes nastier. But I think it's kind of an interesting view of people that we haven't really previously had.
Yeah, that totally unfettered view where you don't think that anyone else is watching, but the data analysts are watching. You are.
Well, the data I analyze is all anonymous and aggregate, so I don't know that any particular man searched how big is my penis. I just know that lots of men apparently.
You know what I think? I think there is an opening in the market for an app which can use AR, like augmented reality. You hold it up to your face, you angle the penis, and then it works out how big it is.
Well, you'd have to know how big the face is, right? You need something behind. You need to be standing in front of the Eiffel Tower or something.
But then you need to know the distance.
And they know the distance. Yeah, but I don't think I don't know.
Yeah, a ruler's easier, isn't it? Anyway, we're getting off track. So you have this unique.
A lot of men when the question is so important to them that I think one of the reasons they ask that is there's almost men don't want to face the moment of truth. It would be easy to just measure, but they're is there another way to find the answer? Because there's so much insecurity, I guess, and fear and anxiety around the process.
Have you seen the South Park episode where they do that?
Where they do what?
They measure their penis. Have you seen this?
No, I haven't seen it.
Anyone who's listening, if you get the opportunity to go back and watch the South Park episode where they all measure each other's penises, it's unbelievable because there's some people who have really small measurements and they all get really, really angry. So then they create this new formula where they adjust for the yaw like the height of the penis, and then they divide it and they create this ratio, and it actually makes it like several feet long. And then all of the problems that everybody had has been completely accounted for.
That used to happen in sports. I remember like my friends and I, we were nerdy, but we were nerdy and very, very competitive. So like we'd get out the stats at the end of the year. I played baseball, and then like we'd all like create you'd have like the basic stats, like your batting average, your home runs, your RBIs, your runs, whatever. And then we'd all create metrics, like how we should weight the different categories to kind of come up with overall offense, the kind of overall production. And we all came up with some metric where we were ranked number one. Somehow, so.
That's the adjusted penis size. So, why call it Everybody Lies then? Why was the book Everybody Lies?
First of all, my publisher chose that title, but I think it's a good title. It kind of gets to the point. Some of my research, which is that people in their day-to-day life lie a lot. So we lie face to face. We also lie, surprisingly, somewhat to anonymous surveys. That's the traditional way we tried to understand human beings historically, what they're thinking, what they're going to do, what they have done, why they do the things they do, is surveys. So Gallup or Pew or Quinnipiac or another organization will ask people questions. And even with this methodology, even though it's anonymous, people do shade their answers to try to sound good. Maybe they're lying to themselves. Maybe they're just in a habit of lying. They don't have an incentive to tell the truth, so they are more likely to say they voted in the previous election than they did. They exaggerate how frequently they have sex. If you ask them in surveys, you compare that to actual condom sales, I show in the book, like it doesn't correspond at all. So what media they consume, how frequently they're watching kind of highbrow stuff versus lowbrow stuff, they'll all lie in these surveys. But now, thanks to the internet and largely Google, but other websites as well, we have kind of a new window into people that I think gets cut through the lies a lot. So Google, for example, you see people searching how to vote, where to vote. That's really predictive whether they're actually going to vote. You see them searching about sexless marriage or sexless relationship. My boyfriend doesn't want to have sex with me. And then you get a kind of a more realistic picture of what happens in many relationships. And you see people searching for their sexual insecurity, or you see people what they actually want to read, the media they actually want to consume. I think it's really much more accurate. And then there's a whole section on pornography. I mean, talk about an area where there's been a huge amount of deception because there are so many taboos in that area. I think we really do have unprecedented window into people's kind of sexuality that we've never had before, thanks to pornography. And I analyzed in Everybody Lies, kind of have a whole section where I analyze just Pornhub, what people actually watch on Pornhub, which makes people giggle, but it's also, I think, pretty fascinating and kind of revolutionary, kind of this window into people's minds that we didn't have. I mean, all of human history up until 5 years ago, we didn't know that. We didn't know what people fantasized about sexually. We might have had some clues by, novels people wrote, or some theories that some, people like Freud came up with, or, there's some surveys, the Kinsey study, but it's kind of a little bit, there's questions about how accurate that was, kind of a biased sample. But I think now we kind of have really much better clues in that arena. So kind of over and over again, I think. So there are just so many areas where I think we do have unprecedented insights into people.
Yeah, and then it's your job to sift through this aggregated anonymous data and try and analyze or come up with some correlations between things and some interesting insights.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the talent. There's kind of an art to data science. I think data science people kind of don't usually associate with creativity. We usually think of art. A painter is creative, a musician's creative, a data scientist we think is kind of this nerdy, just kind of sits by a computer, plugs the numbers in. And I think creativity is a huge part of data science. Otherwise, you kind of just drown in the data and you don't really know what's interesting. So kind of the creativity is kind of looking through all that and finding those nuggets of wisdom, the how big is my penis search, or my other favorite is Indian men. The top Google search my husband wants in India is my husband wants me to breastfeed him. And that's like India.
You're kidding.
Yeah, no, I'm not joking. That's like India and nowhere else. And also breastfeeding porn is reasonably popular in India and nowhere else. Kind of adult breastfeeding porn. And that's kind of the types of things that, I mean, that's kind of shocking in many ways because it's not talked about. it wasn't really acknowledged without this data, and it kind of shows that some sort of fetish can develop in one part of the world and nowhere else, and become kind of somewhat widespread. I don't think it's the majority of Indian men, but it's certainly a large number.
Significant minority, yeah.
Minority without being talked about at all.
And like how else would you find about that, right? How else would you know?
Yeah, and you wouldn't find out about it without this type of data. So so things like that. I mean, kind of finding those insights amidst just kind of rows and rows of data is kind of an art and something that you get better at with practice, and takes a lot of creativity. But yeah.
One of the things that I absolutely love, Pornhub issue a bunch of stats at the end of each year. They don't delve into it like you do, but it's like amount of playtime, the top searches by area and stuff like that. And even the things that they do in-house is pretty powerful.
Oh yeah, and I know some of the data scientists there, and they're really good, and it is just, it's I think people don't take it almost seriously enough. In academia or sociologists, I kind of reached out to Pornhub when I was writing my book, and I'm like, I really want to look at your data. I explained I'm a data scientist. I showed them some of the work I had done writing columns for the New York Times, and they agreed to give me the data. But I would have thought that, I'm like, do you get 10 emails a day from like sex researchers or sociologists, and they're like kind of like, no, they're kind of comfortable with the methodologies they've been using for 50, 60 years, and academia kind of moves slowly and doesn't change that quickly, and so it's kind of, I think your instinct and my instinct is like, wow, that's fascinating, like relative to kind of just another survey about human beings and what they're doing, what they're interested in sexually, actually seeing kind of this data from this enormous site of sexual fantasy or sexual desire is pretty wild.
What happens when you receive the Pornhub stats in your Dropbox or like over WeTransfer or whatever it is? Is it just like this gargantuan kind of sticky, like disgusting sort of bit of stats or whatever? Did it feel icky opening that file versus opening another one?
I'm a little bit like socially oblivious. So like for me, it's just like I might as well just be getting a data set of like interest rates historically, and inflation historically, and running the numbers on that. To me, except this one was more interesting to me, but I'm not like, oh, this is a weird use of my time, or like a lot of people would be kind of queasy looking at this, or embarrassed looking at this. I don't really, whatever part of the brain normal people have that kind of shies away from that type of research or that type of activity, I definitely don't. So I wasn't at all.
Found the right industry to be in then?
Yeah, well, I kind of just invented this industry, I think. But yeah, it does fit my personality. If you have like, you're kind of a little bit, I guess, shameless and not queasy. I think there's kind of a good combination, which is that I built up, before I wrote my book, I built up all these credentials. I did a PhD in economics at Harvard, and I went to Stanford and studied philosophy. I was a writer for the New York Times. I worked at Google. So I think when I do this, people are like, give me like a lot of leeway. Like if I was like some 20-year-old in my 20-year-old like with no qualification, I'm just like, hey, I'm analyzing porn. Everyone would be like, that pervert, like what's that guy doing? But like with me, it's like, oh, this is science. Like I think that people assume a certain respectability with me just based on the credentials, that I kind of get away with more than I otherwise would. I think if I didn't have the credentials and I came out with the research I did, I think a lot of people would be like, wait, that guy just locked himself in his apartment and watched porn for 2 years.
Yeah, this is just him. This is him and his breastfeeding stuff. Yeah.
But with the credentials, it's kind of like, oh, that guy is exploring the deepest recesses of the human psyche.
He's got this veneer of like respectability and academic kind of justification, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I get invited to like all these talks and like prestigious places, and it's never like, it's a which I'm kind of like, did you read like my book, or like how filthy it is and how inappropriate it is at times? But I for some reason I just keep on getting away with it.
Prim and proper academics everywhere, and there's you just swimming in Pornhub statistics towards the stage to say hello to everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I usually bring up some of the porn data, but I try to use that once the introduction comes and there's so much respectability that it's kind of like people kind of go, I can kind of take them along on my ride. So
got you. So what else have we learned from porn? Let's stay with porn for a second before we get away from porn. Were there any other sort of surprising things that came up other than
some of them, I think when the book came out, people said they were really shocking. To me, I didn't find this shocking. So for example, the popularity of rape porn among women is very, very striking in data. A huge percent of heterosexual porn searches for videos watched by women are for kind of violence, humiliation against the woman, and much more popular among women than men, about twice as popular among women than men. That didn't shock me. There have been surveys that kind of have talked about that a lot of women have these types of fantasies, and kind of just in my conversations with friends, I have very honest friends. This is kind of, this kind of come up in my life that it didn't. When I saw the data, I'm not like, oh my God, that shocked. Well, I kind of wrote it.
I mean, look at the most popular book of the last decade.
50, right? Yeah. So
50 Shades of Grey.
But it still did have. I think what was more interesting is you actually can compare the percentages around the world, and it's not correlated at all with how women are treated. That's kind of interesting. It's not like,
how so? What do you mean?
In other words, so you have like some areas like Berkeley, California, or like parts of, or you have Sweden or Finland or Netherlands, which Finland now has a female prime minister, and like where there's really much progressive attitudes towards women. Then you have areas like, Saudi Arabia or Iran where women are really held back, and it's not like, so you could really rank kind of, how women are treated. Are they treated like second class citizens?
How egalitarian it is.
Yeah, and you could imagine that could affect how women think about themselves and kind of affect their fantasies, but it doesn't seem to. It's kind of a pretty
universal desire to watch some hardcore porn.
Even if women are growing up saying they could be everything, they're equal to men. There still is. That fantasy seems to exist in about the same number as the places where women are saying like men should dominate you, men are the should be the leaders of society. So that was pretty interesting.
That is really, really fascinating. Do you ever ask the why question? Do you ever bother to delve into that, or do you just sort of stick to the data?
So I'm trying to in the next level. I think there are, it's I think the initially I was kind of just presenting the facts. And I haven't made much progress. I thought other people would come up with theories. So I thought when I wrote the breastfeeding one, people are going to like, maybe there's some explanation that's very obvious that, I didn't know that, but nothing's come up, to kind of explain this. So I don't know. It's tough. I think there are definitely some areas. So definitely I think people are more attracted to people they grew up around, or like. People like them. I think probably maybe because of their environment. So there's kind of been this long idea that opposites attract. And I think if you see in dating data, it's not true at all. So in dating data, it's very, very clear that people are drawn to people who are similar to themselves on just about any dimension you could measure. And pornography data, it also seems to be the case. So if you look at areas that have high African-American populations, they tend to watch porn featuring African-American. So men in those areas tend to watch porn featuring African-American women in large numbers. So it's not like, I think you could imagine that it would go the opposite way, and the fantasy of the black man would be, the white cheerleader or something. I don't know that you could imagine, but it's definitely not the case. So that kind of, I think, also moves towards the Y direction than maybe sexual. I do think that one of the things you see is that sexual fantasy seems to be related to childhood in various ways. So people tend to have fantasies from their childhood. They fantasize about babysitters or like teachers, or I think there's maybe kind of key moments in childhood where people kind of get imprinted sexually. That also dovetails with some other research in fields of sexuality, that childhood imprinting is really important in developing adult sexuality. So that would explain why if a black man had grown up around a lot of black women, he'd probably be more likely to be attracted to black women than someone who hadn't been grown up.
I get that. What about
Yeah.
when we're talking about the split between heterosexual and homosexual? There must be some interesting insights there about how many men and women are being truthful about their sexuality.
Yeah. So one of the things that's also striking today, which also didn't surprise me just because it had come up in conversations I'd had with very honest friends, is the popularity of lesbian porn among women who otherwise consider themselves totally straight. And I think, I don't think that they're necessarily in the closet. So like I think about I think it was I don't remember the exact numbers. I think something like 20 to 25% of pornography views from women are for explicitly lesbian porn. And I think this has come up in surveys or focus groups. A lot of women that they live in Berkeley or San Francisco or areas where it's totally or where in this day and age I think it's pretty okay to be lesbian. I don't think there are many social pressures to be heterosexual, and they consider themselves straight. They only want to pursue relationships with men, but they're just like, the female body's hotter. Like it's just they can, I think, disconnect kind of the real emotional. Women are maybe sometimes, I don't want to overgeneralize, but women may be better at disconnecting the kind of emotional romantic connection to just like your physical in interesting ways, possibly. I don't know.
That's quite unique insight, because I doubt that the equivalent would be true for men with gay porn.
Yeah, what you see with men is that gay porn's about 5%. It depends on the site you look at, but it seems like about 5% of male porn, maybe a little bit lower, is for gay porn. Mm-hmm. And one of the things you see is that it seems pretty clear. It's almost as high in areas where it's hard to be gay, where a lot fewer men say they're gay. So places like Mississippi or Alabama or Tennessee, if you ask men, are you gay? Only about 1 to 2% of men will say they're gay, whereas in New York and California, about 4% of men will say they're gay. But the gay porn searches are almost the same everywhere, which I think says that a lot of the men in Mississippi are in the closet. I do think you also see with the searches. So the number one search, like one of the top searches, right in the same session where someone searches gay porn, is gay test. Which is also kind of ridiculous search. It's kind of like the "how big is my penis" search. They ask you these ridiculous questions to try to figure out, like, are you gay? But I think, and these searches are much more common in the place where it's hard to be gay, the gay test searches. And I think when you see these kind of the search strings, you kind of see a tortured man, or a man who's really uncomfortable with his sexuality and is trying to find some way to prove that he's not gay.
Almost to himself. He's not proving it to anybody else, right?
Yeah, to some stupid internet test. So I think you do see kind of the torture that that some gay men feel in places where it is hard to be gay, and which is it's changing. Thankfully, fewer and fewer parts of the world now have anti-gay attitudes, but there still are a lot of places.
Yeah, it's interesting now where you're talking about these strings of search terms where you can weave together a narrative of what's going on. Were there any other strings of search terms that you thought were particularly interesting, or anything you've come across recently?
Yeah, so one of them I'm working on an article on this now, but I've been looking at a dark topic, but suicide. I think it's an important topic because you could imagine if you had a search string, if you had a string of searches and someone searches how to commit suicide, you could imagine looking at the searches earlier and kind of getting a view of what's causing them to have that thought. I think that's another area where we don't have right now a great idea of why why people think of suicide, because there's so much stigma around that whole area. And one of the things I found, which is really surprising, was a somewhat common cause of suicidal thought among young people is herpes, getting diagnosed with herpes, the STD, which kind of sounds a little ridiculous. It's not it's a disease that's actually pretty common, and it's not one with, it's not life-threatening. The physical symptoms are, to the best of my knowledge, fairly limited. But I think the stigma is immense, and you can imagine a young person who's just gotten diagnosed with herpes, when people are 18, 19 years old. I mean, if I go back to my own experience in that age group, you don't know what's going on. You don't know how the world works. It's such a time of extreme paranoia that there's something fundamentally wrong with you. I mean, it's kind of like the kids in Mississippi who are searching gay porn and gay tests. It's so easy to get paranoid that you are kind of, you know, lacking in some fundamental way, or you don't know what's common, what isn't common. I've heard stories of women that little girls who freak out when they first grow breasts that they have breast cancer or something. Like it's like when you're a kid and I think the possibility for kind of extreme paranoia is very high, and it can, as the data says, it can lead you to be in so much pain and so much anxiety that you actually think of committing suicide. So I think that's really a promising area of research to kind of get in the mindset of the suicidal, particularly young people feeling suicidal and maybe starting to fight these attitudes. Another thing I found is the number one search in the search string when people search herpes and how to commit suicide is celebrities with herpes, which is they're basically looking for role models. That's actually a common search for just about any illness. So people who have depression search celebrities with depression. People who have back pain search celebrities with back pain. People are looking for role models, for heroes of theirs who share their condition so that they feel less stigmatized. And I looked on Google what kind of happens when you search celebrities with herpes. And if you search celebrities with just about any illness, celebrities with depression, huge number of celebrities openly discuss their depression in part to fight the stigma. Celebrities with back pain, celebrities with, and just about any illness you can think of, a long list of celebrities saying they're kind of coming out of that closet to help. I think to their credit, to help their fans who might also be struggling with this problem. But celebrities with herpes, you see, basically what the top sites, at least last time I checked, was just celebrities denying they had this.
It's the opposite.
Yeah, and then you can imagine, all right, like put all this data together. You have young people, they're diagnosed with herpes, they're thinking of committing suicide, they're looking for celebrities with herpes, and instead of getting greeted with a list of celebrities' videos saying, this is nothing to be ashamed of, it's not a big deal, I live with this, it's you have celebrities saying, I would never have an illness. It's it's kind of like every time I tell this, it does make people giggle, and I admit I've giggled sometimes myself, but I think it actually is like kind of profound and serious, and shows the power of this kind of this unvarnished window into the human mind, and how powerful that could be, and that a lot of people are suffering in ways that it makes us giggle because they're so silly, but to that person, it's not silly. It's like they might as well be in Auschwitz. Like they might, like the pain that a suicidal person is feeling, no matter what the cause of it, is extreme. So, so I think getting a better sense of the people's kind of darker thoughts can be really helpful, and that kind of suggests kind of an obvious way to change it. Get more celebrities to say they have herpes.
I'm not quite sure how you mandate for that, but yeah, you're right. The social, I don't know what you'd say, the social policy implications, the welfare implications, the advertising role model, the everything. There's the downstream from this, third order, fourth order, fifth order effect of us realizing this. Super, super profound. I hope, we're only halfway through this, but one of the things that's certainly coming to mind at the moment for me is that you're right. What you've done so far with your first book is kind of just laid out the facts, right? This is what it is. That's the surface level of the permafrost, right? But the roots underneath, that's the job of a lot of people, several orders of magnitude more people than a guy with a R code and a Google Doc. Like
and there are lots of people in this area, and data science is just exploding in all kinds of ways. And I think a lot of people are, I think definitely millennials or people younger than millennials are also looking. It seems like the values are shifting a little bit, where it's less about just making money. So I think initially everyone's kind of like, oh, data science, that's a lucrative field. I can get a job at, getting more people to click on ads, or get a job in finance, which are totally fine jobs. And
lo and behold, they're swimming through Pornhub data 5 years after they finish their degree.
But I think a lot of people are reaching out to me that they're kind of bored of studying. They like data science, but they're kind of bored of getting people to click on ads, and they feel kind of unfulfilled and lacking purpose. And I think there are ways to use this data towards social good as well.
Got you.
But,
What's your, so we're in 2020, you've just crossed the threshold into the year of the presidential election in America. I mean, this must be like you staring down the barrel of the Super Bowl for your industry, or is it that you're just going to have inundated with loads of different types of statistics, and then you can measure them before and look at what happens afterwards? Have you got some plans for this year?
Yeah, I'll play around. I play around every election. There are definitely insights in the internet. You know, I think Nate Silver of 538 does a really good job of making predictions based on kind of all the data. So it can be hard to be, tough to beat his predictions. Mm-hmm. He put so much thought and care into.
Didn't he? Did you retweet something of his about? Was it the Democratic nominees? Was that like this week?
Yeah. I did. Well, he just built a model of the Democratic nominee, and I just thought that this wasn't based on data. This is actually just based on my intuition that he's maybe underestimating Michael Bloomberg's chances, just because he's his whole kind of in the past models, the past elections where he's building the models from. There's never been a candidate who's willing to just spend billions of dollars to try to get elected. So I think we don't really know how that's going to play out, and that kind of makes me say he shouldn't. I think in his model Bloomberg's at 1% or something like that, and I kind of think maybe 5 to 10% just because. The amount of resources he's going to throw at this problem.
Got you. So have you looked at much data? I don't know whether you can predict this far out, but have you looked at much data for moving forward into 2020?
I think it's tough. I think that this far out, it's tough. You need to look closer. I think so many people just aren't really thinking about their election, or a lot of the general election will come down to who's going to actually turn out to vote. Mm-hmm. And that I think we're going to need to wait, a few weeks before the election where we'll really get clues on who's actually going to turn out to vote.
You hear the story that people decide as they cross the threshold into the voting booth, right? Like it's like the decision that they actually feel like they make is that. But it must be so interesting to compare, because you have exit polls that don't, in the last election that you guys had, the exit polls didn't marry up tremendously well with what actually happened. But did you have more of an insight about what was going to go on, or retrospectively would you have had?
I said Trump was going to win, but I don't know if that's because I'm a genius or a pessimist, because I'm just always predicting.
Let's go with genius.
I'm always predicting horrible things are going to happen, but there are some clues. So one of the interesting things that correlates with voting outcome is the order you put candidates in searches. So a lot of people, they search Trump Clinton polls or Clinton Trump polls or Trump Clinton Trump election. And you can see, if you actually look historically, the order, if people put Trump Clinton first, they're much more likely to go Trump. If they put Clinton first, they're more likely to go Clinton. And that's kind of interesting because it might almost be subconscious. And you could imagine someone like they've been searching Trump Clinton election, Trump Clinton polls, Trump Clinton debate, and then they say, if you ask them, they're undecided, and they go to the polling place and they think they're undecided, and then a few seconds before they cast their vote, as you said, they say, okay, I'm feeling Trump. Well, maybe they weren't undecided all along, and if you looked at the data, they were giving away subconsciously which way they were going to go.
Have you looked at much of Sam Harris's work on free will?
I do know some of that work. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff on that about when they say raise your left or right hand, or pick a random city or whatever it might be, and if they put people into is it fMRIs where they can kind of do brain scans and stuff like that, and they're able to tell when someone made the decision to do the thing they're going to do before they do it, and also before they think that they realized when they were going to decide to do it. And that's this is a more drawn out version of that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure it happens. I'm sure it's a pretty widespread phenomenon.
Yeah. So I'm looking at some of the things that I pulled out of the book. Can we talk about what should you say on a first date if you want a second?
Oh yeah. Well, that's not my study. That's study of researchers. They actually had people tape. They were people going through speed dates, and they had people tape their dates, tape record everything that was said. And then after the date, it was heterosexual dates. The man and the woman said basically whether they wanted to go on a second date. So they could actually correlate the words said on the date with the probability that both you like the other person and that the other person likes you. So some of the things weren't that surprising. So, for example, if a woman laughs at a man's jokes, she's more likely to like him, to want to go on a second date. It's pretty well known. Men, to get a woman to like them, they're supposed to use words that show kind of support and care. So you to say things like, that must have been tough, or that must have been tough, or that sounds hard. That kind of increases the probability that a woman likes you. And then sometimes people like give away, again, subconsciously how they feel, or maybe not so subconsciously, but if a woman uses what are called hedge words, so she says things like maybe or kinda, then she's much less likely to like the guy.
Regardless of what the topic is. Maybe I like cheese, maybe I want a dessert.
Do you want a second date? Kind of, whatever. It's kind of like she's kind of giving away that she's not excited about the guy in saying those things. So that's pretty interesting. And then the more a woman talks about herself, the more she likes the guy, and the more likely the guy is to like her. So like a good successful date tends to have more the woman uses I more. The more the woman uses an I, the more likely it's a successful date from both people's perspective. So kind of the conversation shifts towards the woman's life. That's a good sign.
I wonder if Neil Strauss could rewrite the game, or could do like the game 2.0, but just do it off the back of like big data analysis. And
I think it's definitely promising. Definitely a lot of these. I think a lot of the rules that people have come up with, some of them are probably true. Some of them you find out the data aren't true.
It's interesting to have some of the sort of, I don't know whether you call it like folklore, or some of the stuff that people posit about human nature, right? Like you have from Neil Strauss, just a guy that tries to teach someone pick-up artistry with real-world experience, to a doctor who's got a degree in psychiatry, psychology, or philosophy, or human behavior, behavioral economics, whatever it might be. For the most part, people are just kind of creating these proxies, or this like closest justifiable reason for why they think someone does something, and trying to link these two things together. And then there's you, who's kind of just got this X-ray screen that actually gets to look at precisely what it is, without them being worried about signaling to a researcher, without them being worried about it coming back to haunt them at work because they said that, because they agreed that they voted for some terrible political party with bad views, or whatever it might be. There'll be a lot of fields, I think, that might end up becoming ousted, or like, kind of really, really upended with some of the things that big data will come up with.
Well, it's not just me, but yeah, I definitely
partly you.
This type of research is a very powerful tool. Sometimes it just confirms what people previously thought. Again, that a woman laughs at a man's joke, that means she likes him. I think that's one that we kind of figured out without data analysis, without tape recording. Everybody's all these dates and mining the text. But there definitely are areas where I think our intuition and our theories have been wrong because they haven't been based on data.
So what you said that you're working on a second book at the moment. What's some of your research been, or what have you been interested in recently?
So my second book is on how you can use data to make better life decisions, kind of going off this idea of what you should say on a first date. Partly based on part of the motivation for my book is that when I read what you can actually see now, you can get kind of data on what registers with people as they read your book, because on Amazon Kindle you can see the most underlined lines.
Oh, the highlight function, yeah.
Highlight, exactly. So one of the things I noticed is that people seem really interested in ways they can improve their own lives, which kind of fits the everyday lies theme, because I think people don't necessarily like to admit that as much. People don't, particularly intellectuals, the type of people who would be drawn to my book, like to say they don't read for self-help. They read to learn more about the world, or to kind of help other people. And I think you definitely do see people want to know what can I say on a first date? How can I make more money? What business should I start? So based on that, I'm basically just catering to the masses and writing a book on how you can use data to better life decisions.
You can use data to work out what you should write in a book to have another New York Times bestseller.
Yeah. I guess that's that. Yeah, I guess that's the motivation. But so I'm going through all the different areas of life, and parenting, and dating, and happiness, and
wow. So have you elicited any interesting insights into parenting or happiness recently?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of it's researching other people's data, but talking about other people's data that I don't think not enough people know about. But I'm really fascinated by these people who do happiness studies. I don't know if you've heard about this. They ping people different times of the day, and they ask them what they're doing and their mood.
Oh, yeah. I have heard about them. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's just kind of a really fascinating window into human happiness. That I think hasn't been fully discussed. So there are all these kind of interesting things, and they're like some kind of interesting counterintuitive things. So for example, when people are drinking alcohol, they get a big boost in happiness. That's not surprising. So you get like 3 or 4 points on a 100-point scale of happiness if you're drinking alcohol. But one of the things that's interesting is that people tend to drink alcohol when they're doing something already fun. So if they're socializing with their friends or they're having sex, then they tend to drink alcohol. But actually, if you drink alcohol, then it only gives you a tiny boost in happiness or no boost. But if you drink alcohol when you're doing something boring, which people like never do, or much less likely to do, then you get a huge boost in happiness. So you actually like get a bigger, if you're like cleaning, cleaning up, sweeping the floor or something, or commuting to work. Obviously there are reasons sometimes not to drink during these opportunities, but it's actually more effective for your happiness. I think people use alcohol to try to take a good experience or a great experience and make it epic, which doesn't really work. Instead of kind of avoiding the doldrums,
it's kind of an anesthetic, right?
Yeah, which is dangerous advice. It's kind of a path towards alcoholism. So I want to be very careful that like a lot of people get addicted to alcohol. I don't want to just telling people to drink anytime they're bored or unhappy. Isn't necessary. You have to use caution, but it does kind of show. I think one of the things I'm trying to show is ways that we make the ways that counterintuitive decisions, kind of things that don't feel right, can be right. So it doesn't feel right when you're having fun with friends, or you're doing something really fun. You really feel like if I start drinking, this is going to take me to the next level, and it tends not to work out that way. You don't always think, if I have a beer or two now when I'm doing something, just doing this really boring thing, then then it'll be just fine and fun, and I'll be all right. So
that's really interesting. It's so fascinating that it's a small proportion of the enjoyment from typical drinking activities come from the drinking, and most of it comes from the activities, the playing darts, the pool, the whatever.
That's probably one of the reasons we think drinking with friends is so much fun, because drinking with friends is so much fun, but being sober with friends also is so much fun. So so we don't kind of distinguish that that a lot of it, the reason it's so fun is because of the activity, and we could just do it without it.
Oh, fascinating.
You get a huge bump in happiness if you drink while you're like getting ready to go out, rather than when you actually go out, because that's boring. So maybe I think people are sober when they're like taking a shower and like getting dressed, and then they go out and they have a few drinks. So maybe from a happiness perspective, you should have a few drinks and have a drink in the shower, kind of really enjoy the getting dressed the getting dressed activity will be now tolerable or okay. And then you go out, you sober up, but then you're already having fun, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it levels out that happiness a little bit more. How about parenting? What cool stuff have you found out about parenting?
Thing that data tells us on parenting. So one of the big early studies on parenting, this wasn't even necessarily big data, but they found that they kind of studied adopted kids, and they found that overall the parents you have, the place you grow up, like the household you're in, doesn't make a huge effect on your overall life outcome. So the effect's pretty small. So if you get adopted by this family here or that family there, you tend to end up pretty similar. So it's not a huge effect. So it seems like the overall effect of parenting isn't that huge. But then recently, they found studies mining huge amounts of people who have moved, kids who have moved during their childhood. And they found that the neighborhood you grow up in, if you move to certain neighborhoods, you do way better. So I think if you put together these two findings, the overall effect of your house isn't that big, of the household you grow up in isn't that big, but the neighborhood you live in is pretty big. It means that the single effect of parenting is where you raise your kids. So that has way bigger effect than basically, I argue, everything else you do as a parent combined. Basically, the particular area you raise your kids. And one of the reasons for this is that role models are really important for kids, and the role models aren't just you. So if you see like girls who grow up in neighborhoods with lots of adult female scientists are much more likely to become scientists themselves. They kind of see role models. African American boys who grow up around a lot of African American males who are successful, who stay married, who have jobs, are much more likely to do it themselves. And it's not necessarily true their own parents. So kind of one of the things, kids kind of discount advice from their parents frequently, or rebel against their parents. So your parent, if you're an African American boy, your dad leaves you, you may decide, I'm gonna be the best parent ever because I don't want to be like my asshole dad. Or your dad's a great dad, you kind of rebel the other direction. I can never live up to him. So it's kind of, the parent relationship is very complicated, but the neighbor relationship is not so complicated. It's kind of like, if you have you're a black boy, and you have good African American role models on the street, that's unambiguously good. So in general, kind of like almost the best way to parent is kind of just get a lot of other people to do the job for you. They're just going to discount anything you say. But if you kind of surround your kids with people who live life the way you want your kids to end up, that will have a big impact. And you can use this finding in kind of lots of ways. Kind of I think parents try to lecture their kids too much. Try to lecture their kids, and you got to do this, you got to do that. And I think a better way is take one of your friends who they admire to kind of tell them that, where it's more likely to kind of they'll want to live up to it. Kind of utilize the fact that I think from the evidence that other people are much more influential on your kid than you are, because again, their relationship with you is very complicated.
Yeah, it's so funny that you can outsource parenting to the Joneses next door and be like, right, you take our kids, and I'll take your kids, and you be as good as you can, and I'll be as good as I can, and we'll just have like loads of Elon Musks.
And it means you got to be cautious in the Joneses you choose, the particular Joneses or Johnsons you choose. You can also have bad role models in the area, and they see a guy who's just like is lazy all day and just drinks all the time and seems to be having a good time. And they're just like, oh, I want to be like, I want to be like that.
Yeah, for sure. It's a cliche, right? It's the cliche of the parents that spend several tens of thousands of dollars per year sending their kid to some super high-end private school, or they get them home tutored, and they've tried to give them all of the opportunities and the head start in life, or whatever it might be, and this kid's in with like a bad crowd and grows up to be some drug dealer, or get in trouble all the time, always getting kicked out of schools or whatever it might be, despite the parents' best efforts to try and have
exactly. Well, I think the key is that what the way I read the evidence is you can't mold your kids too much because they can rebel. You have to do it more subtly, basically. You have to be more subtle in putting them in situations without them realizing it, where the kids have to want those outcomes. The outcomes that you want for your kids, you can't tell them to want them. They have to learn to want them themselves if they're really going to go to it, because they can be in the nicest school in the world. If their goal in life is just to party and have fun and not achieve academically or not work hard, then they'll just do that, no matter what you tell them, no matter what school you send them. But if you can somehow give them early on some people who they think are really cool, who work really hard and achieve academically, then they'll want that in themselves. They'll ask you to go to the private school. They'll ask you to get a tutor, and that's going to be really powerful. The best thing you could probably do is trick them so that they're like, I want a tutor, and you're like, well, I don't know if I can afford it, and then you eventually give in, make it they're fighting you to, make it so that they're kind of like you're holding back what they really want.
It was actually your plan all along.
Yeah, actually, it was but don't let them realize that. I think that's more effective than saying you have a tutor, you got to be there, you got to play the piano, you got to do this. But again, the plan can work. It's just you gotta, like somebody to think really cool. I was tutored as a kid. Like that's how I got really successful. That's how I got really. That's how I eventually like did these things that now you think are really cool.
Yeah,
I wanted.
Yeah, I've heard. I don't know whether this is true, but I remember hearing some stories about where parents would treat vegetables as kind of precious and as a reward, kind of like they do with sweets to children, and they'd managed to kind of flip this sacrifice reward matrix on its head, so that kids were like really clamoring, the children were really clamoring to get vegetables because of this basic like, I don't have it, I want it.
Yeah, I think that probably I think
which is kind of like, it's like that's going to be like finding out that Santa Claus isn't real or whatever. Sorry if anyone's kids are watching. I'm supposed to put a warning on before I do stuff like that. If you are listening with your children in the room, I'm so sorry. But it's the same as that, right? Like, it's like one day they'll grow up and they'll be like 14 and realize, hang on a second, vegetables weren't a treat all along. Like, I've been lied to for the last 14 years of my life by these tyrants that I've got as parents. But that's so interesting. I wonder if any of the listeners can think back to who their role models were that were outside of their immediate nuclear family, maybe older brother, or maybe outside of their parent family, like older brother, friends, neighbors, whatever it might be. I wonder if anyone can try and work out where some of their passions that they thought were completely self-created actually may have come from. I always wanted to be a football coach. Well, three doors down was this professional footballer or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of my own experience. I definitely.
Data science, someone with loads of spreadsheets.
The thing is, I want to be a professional athlete. I think that's just from television, and that's also just like a lot of people want to be professional athletes. I didn't live necessarily near any professional athletes, but some dreams probably are just pretty standard. But I definitely did get an academic drive that probably came less from my parents and more from like. Yeah, I did see some people like had gone to these really good schools and like kind of the respect that I thought they'd gotten from having gone to really good schools, which there were a number of people in my neighborhood who had gone to MIT or Harvard or Stanford, and they did have this respect, and I'm like, oh, I could have that respect if I go to one of these schools. So maybe
look at your CV now. You're just swimming in big school diplomas and all different qualifications.
I think that was from seeing that in it, because my parents didn't go to like fancy schools or anything.
Good.
Good. I mean, it's obviously complicated. I mean, parents also can, sometimes be, of course, a role model, and a lot of times kids do just follow in their parents' footsteps. But I do think the parent relationship is complicated, and you do frequently see kids rebelling against the parent in various ways, whereas nobody. Again, like the friends or neighbors, I think nobody at a young age, most people think their friends and neighbors are pretty cool, or their friends' parents are pretty cool.
Yeah.
Aren't like, oh, I'm going to rebel against what that person did or something. So.
Yeah, for sure. Did you do some stuff on the stock market? I was having a little bit of a look. Did you look at the way that the stock market moves and gaming the stock market?
I have a little bit. I didn't have too much success. It's pretty tough. Stock market's pretty chaotic, and I think one of the conclusions I come up with in my book is that it's a lot easier to find insights into like racism or child abuse or abortion or these other areas, because unfortunately there's not as much talent trying to find those insights as the stock market. Yeah. So the stock market, you're competing against astrophysicists and everybody's trying to figure out the stock market, and so it's a little bit of a little bit more challenge, but.
You can't trade racism on the open market, can you? So you can't get rich finding a new map of racism in the United States. You can get rich finding a hidden inefficiency in the stock market. So I think there's definitely much more talent towards the stock market. That it can be tough with public data, as I've historically used, finding kind of an insight. What about you mentioned abortions there. There was the thing about the back alley sort of abortion crisis thing. Can you take us through that?
Yeah, well, I was just shocked by how frequently people search on Google for do-it-yourself abortions, for kind of giving yourself a miscarriage, giving yourself an abortion. And these searches are almost highly concentrated, almost perfectly. If you look at where these searches are, almost perfectly map a place where it's hard to get an abortion. And they went up a lot in 2011 when there was kind of a crackdown in the United States against legal abortion. So I think, and also if you actually look at the data, it does seem like there are missing pregnancies in those areas. So births, basically births have gone down a lot, and abortions haven't kind of abortions kind of also gone down. And you kind of do the math, it seems like probably there's kind of
something's happening somewhere.
And I think a lot of that probably is off the books abortion. Some of it's not bad. There are sadly people who literally search how to use a coat hanger to give yourself an abortion. But some of it's kind of abortion pills, which now people are getting online, some people say it's actually a good thing. Some abortion rights activists say it's actually a good thing because they're pretty safe, and they're a way for people who are in areas where it's hard to get a legal abortion to kind of still have an abortion without
have
other
birth
people.
Control. Yeah.
It's not a huge disaster necessarily, but
got you. So most of what we've spoken about today so far has been to do with Google. Were there any other platforms that you were able to pull data from that you could look at?
Yeah, so Pornhub, as I talked about, I analyzed Stormfront. That's kind of a white supremacist site. Also an interesting data set. I analyzed Wikipedia, where successful people tend to be born.
Where are they born?
College towns and cities, mostly. So, and yeah, that's that part of that's kind of the genetics. They probably have, if you're a kid of professors, you're more likely to be smart yourself and be more likely to be notable in various ways. But I think some of it is exposure to innovation. Again, early exposure. So you see rock and roll stars are much more likely to grow up in college towns. And I think the part of the reason for that is because college towns are kind of places of musical innovation. They have, they historically, it's kind of changing, but they have these kind of they had record stores that were kind of cutting edge. People would, really cool bands would come and play, and they had good radio stations. So I think part of it, the early exposure to innovation.
Got you. And what about Facebook? We got anything cool that you've realized off Facebook recently that you've had data from?
The only things I did is a little politically incorrect, but I looked at, so Facebook you can measure, for basketball I looked at how many fans everybody has on Facebook. So I looked for basketball players, basically how many fans basketball players have. Mm-hmm. I want to see how white basketball players compare to black basketball players. So historically it's been thought that kind of white players get kind of a boost in fandom, and that a lot of teams have we thought that a lot of teams hired like as their 12th player, their lowest bench player, a white guy, just because
the token white guy.
Yeah, token white guy, because people would be more likely to go. So you can imagine building an analysis where you know basically how good every player is in basketball. You can control for all their stats, so how many points they score, how many rebounds they have, how many assists they have, etc. And they say like controlling for that, all else equal, how many fans they have on Facebook. And what you see is that African American players just have way more fans, mostly due to a huge bump up among African American. They basically get a little bump from everybody, so they're a little more popular among white people, a little more popular among Asian people, a little more popular among Hispanic people, and among African Americans, there's just an enormous gain in fandom. African Americans are much more likely to support a black player who's equally good as a white player.
And you got the white player who's number 12 on the bench who hasn't done anything, and he's got like five likes on his Facebook page.
No. Yeah, but the point is that if the black guy hadn't done anything, he'd have 10 likes. So the point is the same player. It seems like, again, contrary to some historical idea that there's kind of a racism bias against black players in the NBA, there seems to be, if anything, a big miss to black players in building fan base.
Got you. So the final question that I wanted to ask is actually one from Jordan, who's part of the Modern Wisdom Project. And he was saying, have your insights from big data changed your use of technology at all?
think the only thing is I Google myself more now that I'm in.
What an answer.
In newspaper stuff. Otherwise, I don't really think there's made a big change.
Got you. Yeah. Well, it's one of the things certainly that's come up here is it is a very interesting insight into human nature, into what it is that we do, and all the stuff like that. But as you say, this anonymous aggregated data is precisely that. Like, it's happening, but I don't know that it's you as it's the guy next door.
Yep. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, which is interesting. Anyway, man, this has been absolutely awesome. Have we got a date or an idea in mind about when the next book's going to come out?
Probably 2021, but I'm not sure exactly when.
You got to get through this presidential election, then you're going to have to do all of your cool.
I'll publish it during the election because everyone's going to be focused on the election.
Yeah, I was talking to Paul Bloom from Yale, and he was saying precisely the same thing. He's doing this new book about suffering, about how people really enjoy suffering. He'd managed to find a link between BDSM and meditation, which actually sounds exactly like one of the things that you would have come up with out of big data. And he was saying, he was like, I think it'll maybe be finished like first draft sort of start of the year and blah blah blah. And I was like, oh cool, so we're going to get it next year? And he's like, no man, it's an election this year. Like, I'm not releasing anything.
Okay.
So 2021, hopefully we'll get a load of new literacy stuff through. So where can people find you online, Seth? They want to follow your stuff, where can they go?
Probably just Google Seth Everybody Lies. Nobody's gonna remember my last name, so just Seth Everybody Lies, and then they'll find my Twitter and everything else. So.
Awesome, man. Yep. Thank you so much. Well, I really appreciate your time. I'm gonna try and work out who it was that I lived near at home and see where the influence was on me.
Great.
Cheers, man. Well, thank you so much, dude.
Thanks.